Alien girl shows human a forbidden garden, but human watches plants move toward only her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Ethan Cole felt the metal walkway hum beneath his boots as he approached the sealed greenhouse wing, the one every researcher pretended not to notice. The evening lights dimmed into a deep amber, making the glass walls reflect his own tired face back at him, pale and smudged with dust from a long shift. His breath fogged in the chilly air, drifting like a small cloud before fading into the faint glow leaking from the restricted garden beyond. Sensors clicked softly overhead. The numbers scrolling across his tablet weren't alarming, but something in them pulsed wrong, like a skipped heartbeat in an otherwise steady rhythm. He paused, adjusting his gloves, listening to the barely audible creak of ivy shifting inside the sealed chamber. Plants weren't supposed to move like that. Not without wind. Not without something calling them. A faint footstep behind him made him turn. Leora stood just outside the spill of light, her silhouette outlined in gentle turquoise shimmer. Her skin carried that natural bioluminescent sheen he had only seen in her species, a soft aura that didn't cast shadows but made the shadows around her seem gentler. She didn't wear the research uniform. Instead, she had wrapped herself in a loose mantle of woven fibers that rustled like palm leaves when she moved. She wasn't supposed to be here after curfew, and neither was he, but neither mentioned it. Her eyes, bright like seawater catching a flashlight beam, lifted toward the sealed door. "You're listening to it," she whispered. Ethan blinked. Listening to what? Leora stepped closer, and the air around him warmed slightly, like stepping near a heat lamp in winter. "The garden," she said softly. "It remembers who comes near." Ethan let out a quiet breath, unsure whether she was teasing him or speaking from a truth he didn't yet understand. "It's restricted for a reason," he murmured. "Not even senior scientists have clearance." "Clearance isn't the same as permission," she replied. Her gaze drifted across the glass, where faint streaks of light pulsed in slow, irregular waves, as though echoing her breathing. "It responds to certain people." Ethan frowned at his tablet again. "There's a pattern in the readings, but it keeps shifting. It's like it's aware," she finished for him. He didn't answer, but the silence between them was enough. Leora took another quiet step toward the door, and for a moment the lights inside the greenhouse brightened, just a flicker, almost like a greeting. Ethan stared, feeling the hairs on his arms rise. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. Leora didn't smile. "I didn't. It did." She placed her palm gently on the glass, and Ethan watched in stunned stillness as, from deep inside the forbidden garden, a single vine lifted, slow, hesitant, and leaned toward her hand, as if drawn by something only she carried within her. For a long moment Ethan stood completely still, watching the vine hover in the air like it was deciding whether to trust her or retreat into the glowing thicket. Leora kept her hand on the glass, her breath calm, almost synchronized with the faint pulses of light inside the garden. Ethan felt something shift, not in the plants, but in the quiet. A strange steadiness, like the greenhouse itself was waiting for him to understand something he had been too busy to notice. He moved closer until he could see the reflection of both of them on the smooth surface, his pale skin almost ghost-like next to her gentle turquoise glow. "Has it always done that for you?" he asked, his voice low to keep from breaking whatever delicate moment had formed. Leora hesitated, her fingers relaxing against the glass. "Since I was very young," she admitted. "I thought everyone saw plants like this. I thought everyone felt them move." She lifted her chin slightly, her expression soft but edged with a quiet loneliness that he recognized. "But when the elders noticed it, they told me never to enter the sacred garden again. They said the place was not meant to answer to a single person." Ethan considered that. The air hummed faintly around them, the way heavy air sometimes vibrated before a summer storm. "Maybe it is not answering to a person," he murmured. "Maybe it is answering to something only you carry." Leora looked at him, and for a second he wondered if he had overstepped, but she only studied him with a thoughtful stillness he had come to associate with her species. as if every word needed to be turned over gently before she decided how she felt about it. "You hear the readings," she said, "but you do not fear them. Most people hear them and walk away." Ethan tapped the side of his tablet, the numbers flickering like fireflies across the screen. "Fear and curiosity use the same doorway," he said. "I just choose to walk through it." She blinked, and a soft spark of amusement warmed her eyes. "Humans say strange things." "We do," he agreed. The vine inside the greenhouse lowered slightly, as if settling, but the faint tremble of leaves made Ethan's pulse lift. Something about the garden felt coordinated, as though it had been listening to this entire exchange. Another reading flashed on his screen, a slow wave pattern, steady, almost like breath matching Leora's. Ethan felt the walkway hum again beneath his boots. "Leora," he asked, "why bring me here tonight?" She lowered her hand from the glass, the turquoise glow around her dimming just slightly. "Because you look at this place the way I do," she said quietly. "Everyone else sees danger. You see a question." She stepped an inch closer to the sealed door. "And questions deserve to be answered." Ethan swallowed. The temperature dropped slightly as the system adjusted to nighttime mode, but the cold only sharpened the moment. He watched her raise her hand toward the access panel, her palm hovering above the biometric scanner that only recognized her species. "Leora," he whispered, "this is restricted for a reason." "So am I," she whispered back. Her hand lowered onto the panel. A soft chime answered, and the locks began to release with gentle metallic clicks, one by one, like the greenhouse itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Ethan stood frozen as thin lines of warm light traced the edges of the door. Something inside the forbidden garden stirred, not harshly, but with unmistakable anticipation, as though the plants sensed her presence drawing near. Then Leora turned slightly toward him, her eyes steady and bright. "Come with me," she said. "If the garden wants to show something, it will only do it while you are here." And as the door eased open just a few inches, a soft glow spilled out across the walkway, brushing against Ethan's boots like a quiet invitation. The warm glow that brushed Ethan's boots grew brighter, thinning the shadows around the metal walkway until every surface looked softly dusted with gold. He felt the air change first, like a gentle breath drifting from the garden as the opening widened. It carried a faint warmth, almost humid, mixed with a scent that reminded him of citrus peel and rain hitting warm soil. Leora stepped toward the opening, moving with a quiet confidence that made the vines inside tremble with recognition. Ethan's tablet flickered, its readings shifting so quickly the numbers blurred into pale streaks. The sensors were detecting something, but he could not tell if they were overwhelmed or simply unsure how to categorize what was happening. "Do not worry," Leora said gently. "It is only greeting us." Ethan let out a slow breath. "It feels like it knows we are here." She nodded once, as though this had always been obvious to her. When she stepped through the doorway, the light inside the garden brightened in a ripple, like someone dropped a stone into a pond made of bioluminescent air. Ethan hesitated only long enough to steady his heartbeat, then followed her. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, warmth washed across his skin, softer than sunlight, but more intentional, as if the space itself was acknowledging him. The interior of the garden was unlike anything he had ever seen in the research archives. Thick trunks curled upward like frozen waves. Their bark seemed smooth and glowing faintly from within. Leaves hung like lanterns, each one gently pulsing in color, shifting from green to blue to a soft lavender hue. Ribbons of mist floated between the branches, catching the light as they drifted. Ethan took a careful step, and the vines on the ground shifted away, creating a clear path ahead of him. "It is making room for you," Leora murmured. There was wonder in her voice, but also a hint of relief, as though the garden's behavior confirmed something she had quietly hoped for. Ethan swallowed, unsure if he should be honored or nervous. "It does not do this for everyone. It does not do this for anyone," she said softly. She walked slowly, and as she did, several delicate stems rose from the soil, tilting toward her like they were curious. The plants did not touch her. They simply oriented themselves in her direction, their bioluminescent veins brightening as she passed. Ethan watched, mesmerized. Every cluster of leaves, every branch, every petal seemed to sway subtly toward her, like small compass needles turning to a single point. But something else caught his eye. When he moved closer to her, a few of the plants shifted again, some continuing to follow her, others turning slightly toward him. He raised his tablet, scanning the nearest stem. The sensor pinged, detecting a faint electromagnetic field, fluctuating in a rhythm he had never seen before. "It is responding to both of us," he said quietly. Leora paused. Her expression softened with a complicated mix of emotion that he could not read at first. "I have never seen it share its attention," she whispered. "It is always only me." Her gaze moved slowly across the plants that were now shifting between them, like the garden was trying to decide which presence to prioritize. Ethan stood beside her, feeling the subtle warmth from the plants growing stronger the closer he came. "Maybe it does not want just one person," he said gently. "Maybe it wants harmony." Leora's breath caught just slightly, and she looked at him with an expression that made the entire greenhouse seem to quiet itself. The air around them felt almost still, despite the gentle rustle of leaves. Then, deeper in the garden, a soft thrum rolled through the roots beneath their feet, like a distant heartbeat calling them forward. Leora turned toward the sound. "It wants to show us something," she murmured, her voice barely above a breath. "And it has been waiting a very long time." Ethan followed Leora deeper into the glowing expanse, each step guided by the soft pulse beneath the soil. The deeper they walked, the thicker the air felt, not heavy, but full, as though it carried layers of quiet messages he could not decipher. Thin strands of luminescent pollen drifted through the air like floating sparks, settling briefly on his sleeves before dissolving into a faint shimmer. Leora slowed her pace, tilting her head as if listening to something beyond sound. Ethan watched the subtle way her shoulders rose with each quiet breath, the slight pause before she exhaled, as if aligning herself with the rhythm of the garden. "It is calling from the center," she whispered. "The heart of it." Ethan glanced around, scanning the patterns of the swaying plants. All the stems and vines angled toward a single direction, forming a subtle spiral, like a galaxy of foliage turning around an unseen core. "Do you know what is there?" he asked. "No one has been allowed that far in for generations," she said. "My people believe the center is sacred. They said it was once connected to something ancient." Ethan frowned at the sensor readings. The energy signature was rising, but not in a threatening way. It was steady, almost gentle, a pattern like the rising hum of a musical instrument being tuned. The deeper they went, the more the plants seemed to anticipate their steps. Branches gently arched upward, creating a canopy of soft glowing leaves that reflected on Leora's face like blue-green firelight. She reached out, not touching the leaves, but letting the light ripple across her hand. "It has never been this awake," she murmured. Ethan felt a faint vibration underfoot, the way a quiet engine sometimes hummed beneath the floor of a ship. He crouched slightly, placing his palm on the soil. It was warm, warmer than any artificially maintained greenhouse floor should be. "It feels like a pulse," he said, "like it is alive in a way beyond biology." Leora knelt beside him, her turquoise glow mixing with the pale luminescence rising from the roots. "I always thought it was trying to speak," she said softly, "but I never understood the language." Ethan looked up at her. Maybe it was not speaking until tonight. She held his gaze for a moment, then rose and moved forward again. The path narrowed, framed by tall, elegant structures that looked like trees but had no bark, only smooth, translucent surfaces with light flowing through them like veins. The air grew warmer, but comforting, like entering a room where someone had just lit candles. As they stepped between the towering structures, the garden shifted. Vines that had followed Leora's movement now turned in slight arcs, some angling toward Ethan, some toward both of them. The garden's attention felt divided, but not confused. It felt deliberate. At last they reached a clearing, a circular glade at the center, where the light was brightest. There, rising from the ground like a blooming crystal, stood a large structure shaped like a flower frozen mid-breath. Its petals were thick, layered, and glowing with a soft, inner warmth. Leora inhaled sharply. "I have only heard stories," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer, feeling heat radiating from the structure, steady and soothing, like standing near a fireplace. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "We call it the first bloom," she said. "The elders believe it holds the memory of our beginnings." Ethan slowly circled the structure, scanning it with his tablet. The readings spiked with complex patterns he had never seen before. This is more than memory, he murmured. There is data here. Something encoded. Leora placed her hand near one glowing petal, not touching, but letting the warmth brush her fingers. The petal responded, brightening gently, like a heartbeat welcoming her home. Ethan watched in awe as another petal brightened, tilting slightly toward him, as if sensing his presence. Leora turned to him with wide eyes. It recognizes you. Ethan felt a quiet shiver run through him, not fear, but something like destiny shifting in the air. The first bloom pulsed again, light rolling outward through the clearing, making every plant around them bow slightly, as though the entire garden was acknowledging their arrival. Ethan, Leora whispered, her voice trembling with wonder. I think it has been waiting for us both. The clearing felt warmer now, as if the first bloom had expanded its quiet presence around them. Ethan's breath steadied while he studied the glowing structure, the soft radiance brushing against his face like gentle warmth from a lantern. Leora stepped closer, and every vine at the edge of the glade leaned in her direction as if pulled by an invisible tide. Ethan watched the way the light shifted across her features, giving her skin a soft shimmer. She looked both humbled and afraid, not in a fearful way, but in the way someone stands before a truth they have avoided all their life. My people said the first bloom only responded to the chosen line, she whispered. Those connected to our oldest ancestors. But no one alive has ever seen it awaken. Ethan circled the structure slowly, his eyes tracing the patterns of light flowing through its petals. He kept his movements quiet, as if sound alone might disturb the delicate energy woven through the place. His tablet flickered, struggling to interpret what it sensed. This is more than a plant, he murmured. It is like a living archive. Leora tilted her head. Archive. Memory mapped into biology, Ethan said. Information stored in light, patterns, maybe even scent. Multilayered, not digital, but something older. Something more organic. Leora watched him with a stillness that was not emptiness but focus, as though she could feel the knowledge resonating through the air. She stepped toward the first bloom until she stood just inches from the nearest petal. The glowing surface brightened at her nearness, and a warm ripple traveled through the clearing. Ethan felt the temperature rise gently, like stepping close to a sun-warmed stone wall. The plants surrounding the clearing shifted again, some vines angling toward Ethan with slow, graceful movements. It was not threatening. It was simply attentive. It is dividing its attention between us, Ethan said quietly. I have never seen behavior like that. Leora turned toward him. I do not understand why it would respond to you. Ethan shrugged lightly. Maybe because I am not afraid to listen. She studied him for a moment, then reached out her hand, not to him but toward the center of the first bloom. Ethan held his breath. The petal closest to her lifted a fraction of an inch, its edges luminous, as though recognizing something familiar in her presence. The light brightened in a soft wave that moved from one petal to the next, forming a slow spiral of illumination. Ethan stepped closer, and the spiral shifted, expanding as though making room for him as well. The glow wrapped gently around both of them, warm, steady, patient. It feels like it is breathing, Ethan whispered. Like it is waking up, Leora said. Her voice trembled with something like awe. My mother used to tell stories about the first bloom. She said it held the memory of when our kind first learned to grow with the land instead of against it. But those were myths. Lessons for children. Ethan tapped lightly at his tablet. Myths have roots. Sometimes literal ones. Leora gave a faint, almost shy smile at that. But the smile faded as she stepped even closer to the central structure. The light followed her. Motion rippled outward through the glade, every leaf responding with a subtle sway. Ethan moved beside her, drawn by the same pulse. Do you feel that? He asked. Leora nodded. It is like it is asking us something. The first bloom pulsed again, brighter this time, and the warmth deepened. Ethan felt the air thicken slightly, not with weight, but with meaning. Maybe it is not asking, he said softly. Maybe it is showing. Leora exhaled slowly, her turquoise glow dimming and brightening with the shifting light. Then we should listen. As if answering her words, the central petal unfurled a tiny amount, revealing a faint swirl of soft golden light within, like the beginning of a story finally ready to be told. The golden light inside the partially unfurled petal shimmered like a quiet lantern tucked behind layers of living glass. Ethan watched its glow expand and contract in a slow rhythm, not quite breathing, but close enough that his mind kept trying to compare it to something familiar. Leora moved beside him, her turquoise glow blending with the warm amber radiance until both colors drifted together across the petals like two soft currents meeting. The first bloom pulsed again, and the surrounding plants responded instantly, their leaves tilting inward in a coordinated ripple. It felt as though the entire garden had settled into attentive silence. Ethan raised his tablet, but the data stream ran wild, scattering into symbols he had never seen in any scientific archive. It was not malfunctioning. It was receiving too much. "It is transmitting something," he murmured. Leora's eyes narrowed slightly in concentration. "I can feel it. Not in my mind. More like in my chest." Ethan lowered the tablet and placed his palm lightly against the ground. The warmth beneath the soil spread into his hand, gentle and steady like a pulse through packed earth. "It is resonance," he said softly. "The roots are carrying it." Leora stepped closer to the unfurled petal, her face illuminated by the golden swirl inside. "What do you think it wants us to understand?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "With plants, signals are usually warnings or invitations. This does not feel like a warning." Leora lifted her hand slightly, stopping just short of touching the glowing surface. The first bloom reacted immediately, brightening so gently it felt like a smile. The golden swirl inside expanded and formed a delicate pattern, a ring of interwoven lines that shifted between shapes too fluid to be letters, too structured to be random. Ethan leaned closer, careful not to disturb the air. "It looks like a map," he whispered. Leora blinked. "A map to what?" "Not a place," he said after a moment of studying. "Patterns like this usually represent a process, an exchange." Leora's voice lowered to a near whisper. "Between what and what?" Ethan's next breath caught as a second swirl formed beside the first one, smaller and pale blue. The two swirls rotated slowly toward each other until they nearly touched, then pulled back in a graceful arc. "A demonstration. A concept. A pairing," Ethan said quietly. "Or a balance." Leora stared at the swirling symbols, her eyes reflecting the gold and blue light. "You think it is showing us a relationship? Maybe not between people," Ethan said, "but between forces. Energy, biology, something that cannot function alone." Leora exhaled, a soft sound that the glowing petals seemed to respond to. "My ancestors believed the first bloom chose harmonies, not individuals. They said the one who entered the garden was only half of what it needed." Ethan felt a warmth spread gently up his arm, not from the air, but from the way the plants subtly shifted in his direction. For a moment, the first bloom brightened toward him, then toward Leora, as if acknowledging them both separately and together. "Maybe," Ethan said slowly, "it recognizes that you and I together complete whatever pattern it is trying to share." Leora turned toward him, something vulnerable flickering behind her steady glow. "And what if my people misunderstood?" she whispered. "What if the chosen one was never meant to stand alone?" The golden swirl suddenly widened, the petals of the first bloom lifting a little higher, casting warm light across the entire clearing. For a brief moment, every plant bowed inward in a coordinated arc, not threatening, but reverent, as if answering her question with unspoken certainty. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones, gentle but undeniable. "Then," he said softly, "the garden has finally found what it has been waiting for." Leora gazed at the glowing core, then at Ethan, and the clearing brightened again as if the entire place agreed. The clearing held its breath, or at least it felt that way, as if every glowing petal and every trembling leaf had paused to witness whatever came next. Ethan stood beside Leora, feeling. The warm rhythm of the first bloom pulsed gently through the soles of his boots. It was a soft, steady thrum that reminded him of a calm heartbeat, almost comforting in its quiet insistence. Leora lifted her hand again, stopping just short of touching the luminous surface. Her fingers hovered in the warm air, glowing faintly from the reflected light. "If it truly wants harmony," she whispered, "then what does it expect from us?" Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but the first bloom pulsed before he could speak. The golden swirl inside the center began to shift, folding into itself, unraveling, then reforming into a new shape. This time the pattern elongated, stretching into two parallel lines of light that moved closer and farther apart in a slow, rhythmic dance. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "It is showing distance," he murmured. The lines drifted apart, then drifted back together. Leora watched the motion with deep focus, the glow reflecting in her eyes like two small suns. "Or maybe connection," she said. "Something that must be approached carefully." Suddenly the air changed. A soft vibration rolled through the clearing, rising from the ground like a warm wave. Ethan steadied himself. It was not violent, not alarming, but undeniably intentional. The vines around them lifted slightly, curving inward with quiet anticipation. "It is drawing energy from the entire garden," Ethan said softly. "Whatever it is preparing to show us, it is important." Leora stepped one pace closer to the first bloom. The petal nearest her brightened instantly, responding to her presence with a gentle warmth that washed across her skin. "I have felt this hum before," she said, her voice steady but low. "When I was a child, I would hear it whenever I walked past the sealed gates. It would quiet when others were near, but never with me." Ethan glanced at her. "Maybe it recognized you long before you ever stepped inside." She inclined her head thoughtfully, then looked at the center again. The swirling light inside the petals shifted shape once more, blossoming outward into a pattern of concentric rings that expanded gently, like ripple marks spreading across a still pond. Ethan watched the expanding rings with growing realization. "Those are waves," he said. "Energy waves. The bloom is showing us how its influence spreads." Leora frowned softly. "Influence for what purpose?" Ethan hesitated. The rings expanded farther, then shifted direction. Half of them angled toward her outline. The other half flowed toward him. Leora's brow lifted as she followed the movement. "It is dividing the pattern again," she said. "Just like before." Ethan nodded slowly. "Balance. Whatever this organism is meant to do, it needs both of us to complete the pattern." A soft gust of warm air swept across the clearing then, carrying with it a faint scent like fresh rain mixed with something sweet. The vines around them responded, leaning ever so slightly closer. "It is waiting for us," Leora whispered. Ethan stepped forward until he stood beside her at the very edge of the first bloom's glowing core. The warmth thickened, embracing both of them. "I think it needs us to touch it," Ethan said quietly. Leora's breath caught. "Together?" "Together," he said. It was not a command, just an understanding carried by the air around them. Leora turned to him slowly, her expression softening with something like cautious trust. She raised her hand. Ethan lifted his own until their palms hovered only a breath apart, both inches away from the glowing petal. The light brightened, sensing their decision. Then, with a calm steadiness that matched the heartbeat beneath the soil, they placed their hands upon the first bloom at the exact same moment. The moment their hands touched the warm surface of the first bloom, a gentle wave of light expanded outward, not bright enough to blind, but soft enough to feel like warm water moving across their skin. Ethan felt a low resonance travel up through his palm, threading into his arm like a quiet current. It did not hurt. It felt like recognition, as if the bloom were learning the shape of him. Leora inhaled sharply beside him. Her turquoise glow brightened, responding instinctively to the shifting energy. "It is reading us," she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly, unable to look away from the swirling patterns inside the flower's core. The golden and blue lights intertwined, forming spirals that danced around one another and then separated again. The air grew warmer, filled with the faint scent of something like crushed mint mixed with rain-soaked leaves. Every plant in the clearing responded, bowing inward in a slow, coordinated movement, as if honoring a silent ritual. Ethan felt the resonance deepen. "It is forming a link," he said quietly. Leora stood completely still, her hand steady against the glowing petal. "A link to what?" Before Ethan could answer, the first bloom pulsed a second time. This pulse traveled outward through the entire clearing, and suddenly the surrounding plants illuminated with synchronized waves of light. They glowed in patterns, complex and layered, forming shapes Ethan had only seen in biological models and ancestral diagrams. "Leora," Ethan murmured, "I think it is showing us your people's history." The lights rippled again. The shapes morphed into tall structures resembling trees, but their branches formed geometric angles too precise to be natural. The patterns shifted into silhouettes of figures standing near these structures, their bodies outlined in faint, shimmering light. Leora stared, wide-eyed. "These are the first gardeners," she breathed. "The elders said they lived before time was counted. They shaped the land and listened to the living things." Ethan watched another wave sweep through the clearing, forming new images. This time the shapes multiplied, branching outward like a family tree. Ethan pointed slowly. "These lines, they are lineage markers." Leora's eyes softened with quiet awe. The oldest stories say the first gardeners could speak with the land. But no one believed it was literal. Ethan felt the resonance shift under his hand, gentle but different. A new swirl of color formed inside the petal, one he had not seen earlier. It glowed silver for a moment, then blended into the gold and blue patterns. Leora leaned closer. "That symbol," she whispered. "I have seen it in the temple inscriptions." Ethan frowned. "What does it represent?" Leora hesitated, her voice lowering. "Union, not marriage or bloodline. A meeting of two forces that make the land stronger." Ethan absorbed that quietly, his palm warming further beneath the light. "It sensed both of us," he said. "It brought us here together. What if the bloom has been waiting for this kind of balance?" The first bloom brightened again, confirming something neither of them had said aloud. The silver symbol split into two halves, one glowing toward Leora and the other toward Ethan. The halves drifted closer, then clicked into place like the final pieces of a puzzle. Leora's breath trembled. "It is choosing us," she said softly. Ethan felt the truth settle around them like warm air. The first bloom pulsed again, this time softer, almost tender, sending a gentle glow through the clearing. At the edge of the glade, the vines lifted in unison, their movements slow and reverent, as if bowing to the bond that had just been acknowledged. Ethan glanced at Leora. She met his gaze, and for a moment the entire garden seemed to quiet, holding them in a shared stillness. "The bloom is not just showing us the past," he whispered. "It is showing us what comes next." And the first bloom glowed brighter, as if agreeing. The first bloom's glow softened, settling into a steady radiance that wrapped the clearing in warm light, like the last quiet moments of sunset. Ethan kept his hand against the petal, feeling the gentle pulse beneath it. Leora stood beside him, her turquoise glow rising and falling with each measured breath. The silver symbol that had formed between their reflections hovered for a moment inside the petal's center, shimmering faintly before dissolving into soft strands of light that drifted upward like weightless seeds. Ethan watched them float, their glow fading into the canopy of leaves overhead. The clearing exhaled with them, a warm breeze stirring the vines in a motion that felt almost like approval. "It is done," Leora whispered. "Whatever it needed from us, it is complete." Ethan lowered his hand slowly, feeling the warmth linger on his skin. "Then why does it still feel like it is waiting?" Leora looked toward the surrounding foliage. The plants were no longer bowing inward. They stood tall, open, as if a long-held tension had left them. "Maybe it is not waiting," she said softly. "Maybe it is releasing us." The first bloom pulsed once more, but gently, like a soft farewell. Ethan stepped back, giving the living structure space. As he did, a new pattern of light formed at its base, small at first, then slowly spreading across the ground in a spiral. The lines glowed faintly, tracing pathways beneath the soil. Ethan knelt, brushing his fingertips near the illuminated trails. "These are directional markers," he murmured, "roots showing where they are connected." Leora crouched beside him, her expression thoughtful, "Showing us how far its reach extends." "Not just that," Ethan said. "These lines, they are shifting. Look." Leora leaned closer. The glowing pathways bent gracefully, converging toward the sealed entrance they had entered. Leora's eyes widened with quiet understanding. "It is guiding us back." Ethan rose slowly, absorbing the meaning. "It wants us to leave, not because we are unwelcome, but because our part is finished." Leora touched the soil lightly with her fingertips. The ground warmed beneath her touch, recognizing her one last time. She stood, her expression touched with something bittersweet. "All my life, I thought this place feared me," she whispered. "I thought I was the reason it was locked away." Ethan shook his head gently. "It did not fear you. It was waiting for someone who could hear it. And maybe someone who could stand beside you." Leora turned toward him, her glow softening. The first bloom brightened behind her, casting a halo of warm gold around the edges of her silhouette. The vines lifted slightly with the motion, tilting toward her one final time. Then the light dimmed, settling into a peaceful glow that signaled rest, not rejection. Together, they walked toward the edge of the clearing. The plants shifted aside until a clear path opened, wider than before, welcoming and unhurried. Ethan felt the gentle hum beneath the soil fade as they moved farther from the center, like a lullaby concluding its final note. When they reached the threshold, Ethan glanced back once more. The first bloom stood perfectly still at the heart of the garden, glowing quietly, as if storing its memories again after sharing them for the first time in generations. Leora followed his gaze. "Do you think it will ever call us again?" she asked. Ethan exhaled softly, watching the petals pulse with a faint, serene light. "Maybe," he said, "but I think tonight was less about us coming to it, and more about it sending something out with us." Leora's glow warmed, a gentle reflection of the understanding settling into her eyes. They stepped through the doorway together, and as the garden lights dimmed behind them, the vines lowered in a slow, graceful motion, like a final bow before drifting back into stillness. The door closed with a soft chime. The greenhouse fell silent, but Ethan could still feel the faint echo of the bloom's pulse in his palm, a warm reminder of a connection bigger than either of them. Leora looked at him in the quiet hallway. Her voice was barely above a breath. "The garden did not choose just me." Ethan met her gaze, the last glow of the bloom lingering in his memory like a steady ember. "No," he said softly. "It chose us." And down the hallway, the faintest trace of warm light flickered once, then faded, leaving behind a silence filled with meaning.